Let's do this. All right. Hello. How are ya? Good? Yes? All right. Drupal Camp Costa Rica, thank you so much for allowing me to be here. I am totally honored and flattered to be a part of this. I come from the United States. I come from Pennsylvania. This session will be in English. I apologize. I do not speak Spanish, but I admire all of you. You guys are very good at it. First, I again want to thank the camp organizers. And can we give a small round of applause for Nikki and Ryan? Their keynotes were amazing. Guys, yes. Cool. So today I am speaking about Drupal 8 module development and porting and the work that I've done and the things that I've learned. Yesterday I gave a talk on accessible continuous integration, and that was more of like a topic and a discussion. Today I'm getting my geek on. Let's do it. All right, so where are we starting? Let's look at configuration management, information about entities, plugin systems, some recent Drupal 8 stuff that might be kind of fun or new or exploratory, and we're going to talk about the best practices. All right, who am I? Well, my name is Adam. I go by Nerdstein. I am the Associate Director of Engineering at Civic Actions. If you have not heard of us, you should. We are awesome. It's an incredible company. We love everybody. I have a Master's of Science in Information Systems Security and Computer Science. I'm a Drupal 8 enthusiast. I've been using it for several years now. I really enjoy it. And I participate in the most recent Google Summer of Code. I had 2 students and 2 projects. And I also participate in the Acquia Accelerate program to help move modules along in the community. Here's a list of some modules that I've either touched or ported or participated in or done something with. Password policy, password strength, taxonomy menu, services, multi-select, secure pages. I've done pretty much every encryption module. Key encrypt, field encrypt, file encrypt, 2-factor authentication, security review. We ported the GA login module over Google Summer of Code. And I started this new project called Vault, which I think is going to be kind of cool. It's using the HashiCorp Vault product and trying to integrate that with Drupal. That should be a fun one. I haven't really started developing yet. It's all up here. I didn't really choose this thug life. The thug life chose me. Okay? Thank you, Aaron, for encouraging me to include that. So I'm going to tell you, and we have some students in the room, I believe, and some people that hopefully are still in their Drupal 8 or Drupal experience learning, as I am very much so myself. Porting modules is just a huge, highly impactful way to give back to the community and learn yourself, right? It's like, it's dual purpose. So there is absolutely like, it is great. It is such a rewarding activity, and I hear when I go to conferences or camps, people come up to me all the time and say, oh man, I just used your module. Like, awesome, right? I'm like, yeah, cool, that makes me feel good, right? So, but the claim I'm also going to make is that you can do a really good job if you do it correctly, right? I have seen some of the worst code ported to Drupal 8 that it's like astonishing. So what are we going to do? We are going to figure this out. That is the purpose of this talk. So where do we start? All right, let's just clear our minds for a moment and get into a new space. Where do we begin on this journey? Well, first, I'm going to tell you, start with a brand new branch and no code at all. Give yourself a blank slate, right? Then you have no encumbrances. And why am I saying that? Drupal 8 establishes new architectural paradigms that you will want to use. That is what is going to make your code good if you take advantage of the system, right? And the API and the framework, and you do it the right way. But guess what? If you're bringing code with you, does it follow the same conventions that Drupal 8 does?
said no.
Thank you. So you need to start blank and be curious, right? Exploratory and creative, okay? And this is a mindset, a mentality, and be fearless, right? You have to dive in and be just totally cool with it. All right, step number 2. You need to get familiar with the Drupal 8 architecture. You have to understand some of the concepts that you have to work with, right? You have to do some reading on Drupal.org or read up on some blog posts or do some code reviews of core or other modules that you download, right? Take a look, get familiar, get accustomed, and immerse yourself because you can't make the right choices if you don't know the choices to make, right? That's kind of obvious. So you need to immerse yourself and get educated and understand the different parts of the Drupal 8 system so that you can make the best and wisest decisions on how to implement what you want to do. Cool. Excellent. All right. The next step, and I apologize if some of these seem obvious, but we're just building up this story, okay? So the next thing you want to do is you want to get really super familiar with what it is that you're trying to do. Actually think about it, right? Like take a step back and plan and kind of like frame things in your mind about what do you think is going to be good for your project, right? Like what makes sense? So you did all this reading about Drupal 8, like okay, so do I want to use entities over here? Do I want to have a plugin system over here? Think about it. Just start asking some basic questions. This one is totally awesome, by the way, and this is 100% in line with who we are as a community. Find yourself a mentor. It's on Drupal.org. You can like actually say, hey, this dude is my mentor, right? You know, or this awesome web chick is my mentor, right? It's crazy cool how people can really connect and actually collaborate with each other and learn from each other, right? I'm sorry. I had to. Okay, yeah, yes. So as you're starting to think about what your project needs and you've learned about Drupal 8 and you're really getting like comfortable and starting to explore this, well then actually document an architecture. Like say, I think that using these tools can meet my project needs and put it down. Like don't just leave it here. Like, you know, if you start a project, file issues in the issue queue that say, I need, you know, a plugin system and I need these entities and then work against them just like so the community can see every single thing that you're doing, right? Visibility is huge. Now, this one I learned the hard way, and this is a very embarrassing lesson for me to share. Do not assume that you need to port something. I was like, oh man, I love the menu block module. Like, it's so nice, like it's very handy. I want that in Drupal 8. So what did I do? I went and I started coding it, and I was developing it, and guess what I learned? The block system in Drupal 8 does exactly what menu block does in 7. Key point, Drupal 8 has a host of new features that might make what you're trying to port irrelevant, or at least a lot different. Okay? All right, so let's get into the geek. Symfony and object-oriented. Okay, so again, we're transitioning from, hey, this is how you should think and start to get yourself acclimated. Let's get into the technology that you need to be comfortable with. And that starts with Symfony and object-oriented coding. If you are not familiar with namespacing, classes, interfaces, and conventions around object orientation, this is the #1 difference that you will either love or hate in your journey. And you need to get comfortable because everything in Drupal 8 is object-oriented. It is way less procedural. There's not rogue function calls that need to be named certain ways, and you know, there's some of it, very small, right? But it's way more object-oriented. If done properly, you will have a really clear understanding of what a container is, inside of Drupal 8, and the concept of dependency injection. Dependency injection is very, very significant, especially for performance. You can load the context of what you're trying to do inside of your classes and use the context throughout the system in a way that it tells Drupal, I need the user object and I need this other object over here, and you bring it in and you define it, right? In doing so, Drupal can easily understand that. It actually makes it more efficient and more effective in understanding what your class is trying to do. If you ask, well, how does one get up to speed on all of these concepts? Well, Symfony has a book. It's like completely free online. And it's really good. It's actually very readable, very understandable, and the concepts are like explained very delicately, so someone like me can understand them. It's really great. Okay, so now we're going to get in. We've talked about the lowest level foundation of how we might go about coding things, but let's talk about different design patterns of the classes and things that we might see as we're doing development. Well, we have controllers, services, and we have entity-related operations. This, I think, is very much an art, right? There are different places that you could store code, and it could be right. You could put the code into a controller or into a service or into an entity, and it would work flawlessly. But the question is, where is the right place to store things? Controllers are better when you're handling requests and you're mediating direct requests from the browser. Services tend to be useful if they are used across multiple entities. In entities, if you have an operation or a piece of code that runs directly on an entity, that should be in the class that you're developing, right? So that's it. So what if I told you that you were not in Kansas anymore? If you really want to get crazy, when I developed Taxonomy Menu and with the help of Chris Vanderwater, who's Eclipse GC, we developed the services module with Kyle Browning as well, and we used a concept called a deriver. And what a deriver is, it says, I have one type of system over here, so that could be a menu, and I have another type of a system over here, and that could be a taxonomy. And a deriver says, I'm going to sit in the middle and bridge these two things. And this concept, man, was very, very hard to initially grasp. They have interfaces in core for derivers that can bridge menus and taxonomies and anything that you might want. But very powerful, but it twists your mind. It was very hard for me to understand it at first. Okay. Woo, this one's a good one. All right, configuration management. So, folks, Drupal 7 people, there are no more features. Well, there are. I lied. But we don't make as much use of them conventionally because Drupal 8 ships with a configuration management system. So you don't really need it. You don't have to use the features module like you had to in 7 if you wanted to deploy code into multiple environments. So this is, kind of amazing, right? And I'm just a little excited about it. What do you need to know about configuration management? Well, it makes huge use of the YAML format. So everything in Drupal 8 is YAML. It's either an object-oriented class or it's a YAML file, I swear, right? So YAML is a data format that has many different kind of aspects of it, but the common ones that I have used on my projects are things like it has key value pairs. So like, the dog is purple, right? And that's a really bad example. You get the gist. It also can support nested trees. So if you have, it's not like rigid, you could put any level of hierarchy of configuration that you would want, ever. Dream it, you can do it. And it also supports arrays and it supports objects. So YAML has conventions for storing all of these different types of information, and you can make use of that as part of the configuration management in your modules. Now, one really key thing to understand is how do you make use of configuration management inside of your project? What are the ways that you can do that? Well, first, there are YAML files for things like info files and your service definitions and things that you can define that are related to your project. So all of the types of standard metadata that you might see in Drupal 7, it is very much likely to be a YAML file in Drupal 8. The other thing that you can do is you can load in your project installation configuration. So if I want certain settings or certain configuration to be loaded whenever I enable my module, I can put that directly into my project folder as YAML, and it will import it in directly when the project is enabled. So that's kind of nice. Schemas. So previously in Drupal 7, using the database system, basically you had to define a whole bunch of fields and their types and their attributes and things like that. And you still need to do very similar things for Drupal 8. But as we're going to get to later, entities, you do not need to code things at a database level for an entity. So all the configuration in the schema that you would want for an entity resides in YAML. It's actually configuration. So the way that you would define the fields and the type of data, it all goes into YAML. And one of the really cool things for all the DevOps folks that are in the room is the fact that CMI basically prescribes certain standard practices for using deployments. Like you can basically ship your entire configuration, write it to a file system or a code repository, and ship it through your environments for testing or for production, deployments. So it's really nice that there's commands now that are in Drush that do this very simply, very easily, and it's cool. You could do single configuration, or you could do the whole, kit and caboodle. Is that an US-ism? Sorry. Fail. Okay. Let's talk about entities. So with entities are huge. This is a major and massive, very well-built system in Drupal 8 that you should be using. So the concept of entities are you have the base definition, and then you have instances of those definitions on top of that, right? And the entities, the different entity types have metadata, so it describes what the type of entity it is and any attributes like static metadata that is defined, that is pertinent to the entity. It could say, I'm a configuration entity, or I'm a content entity, or I'm, in any other types of settings you might want, the add form, or the delete form, or the listings, are all defined really as standard metadata for entities. And those are defined in annotations, by the way, which I didn't list here. Entities have fields and properties. So when you're using an entity, say you're building a car entity, that car can have a color, and that can have, size of the wheels, right? And all kinds of different attributes that can be described and defined as fields and properties of that entity. So bear in mind, that's how the object orientation works inside of Drupal 8. So this is kind of big. So Drupal 8 ships with two primary types of entities. It ships with something called a content entity, and it ships with a configuration entity. And what is the big, we'll kind of talk about these a little bit. I don't want to steal my thunder. But for content entities, the easiest way to kind of think about that is a node, right? Because a node is a piece of content that lives on the site, and its storage is in the database, correct? Yeah. But one thing I learned after screwing up many, 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 many times is avoid using the database system. Most things that you do probably will be an entity. It'll be a content entity, it'll be a configuration entity, one of the two, right? So that actually means that you can avoid writing direct database queries or writing direct schemas in the database. Let the entity system do it for you. It's way easier. Configuration entities are basically a wrapper for building your own type of configuration that uses YAML, right? So we talked about content entities being stored in the database. configuration entities are stored with YAML. So you can export the instances, right? So if I create an instance of a configuration entity, that can be shipped into YAML. So what's an example of that? If I want to deploy my site with a new taxonomy menu, right? That is a configuration entity. I want that to be in the file system and I want to deploy it. I don't want to have to create the content for it in every system. So that's an example of a configuration entity. So when you're trying to determine what it is that you want to use, if I want content or config, you would say to export or to not export. That is the question. And lastly, I wanted to talk about functions and operations because this is really key. Like this is a very core object-oriented principle. Is if you're building an entity, if there are operations or functions that belong to that entity, they need to be in the entity. Do not make a procedural function in your module file. Do not put a service together. Do not put something in a controller. It goes in the entity. If it belongs there, it should be there. Plugin systems. Okay, point number one. Drupal 8 is not procedural. There are very, very small instances where this is actually the case. And it is because of hooks. Hooks are the only thing that I have really seen that is procedural in nature in Drupal 8. And the reason for that is because it is a runtime override, right? You have the ability to change and intercept when a request is made, how that request is processed on the fly. But that's it. There's no more function calls. You really should not be seeing a lot of that. If your code has a lot of it, you might not be doing something right. This was the entire motivation of the plugin system API in Drupal 8, is to have the ability to be able to change and alter or extend behaviors of the system. So when we developed the services module, we created a plugin system to allow for an API to be developed for any service that you want. And this is handled with object orientation. This is code. So you can develop any plugin that you desire, and it can be represented as a service. And as long as you follow the correct naming conventions, which if you saw Ryan, who saw Ryan Wheel's migration talk? Yeah, he talked about how directories should be named using PSR0 and PSR4. That's a standard. It's the same idea. So the plugin systems say, I'm expecting to see these plugins in these certain directories. And if your module has that directory, you can write a plugin. Event subscribers are kind of a lower level way to tap into hooks, and they're not procedural. So event subscribers is a Symfony concept that it can look for the context of certain events inside of the system and do it at a very, very low level, like before Drupal really even starts thinking about things, right? So it's definitely something you should research. This is in the Symfony book, and Drupal does make use of this. So this is one really good example is on password policy. If your password expires, I send you to your password page. I say, you got to fill out your password. I wrote an event subscriber that checks at a very low level before the request is processed to see if you are expired. And if you are, I kick you out. Gone. I still love you. I just kind of like this one. Sorry. It doesn't really have any relevance. Okay, so recent exploration. What has been on my mind? So I just gave you most of the information, right, that I learned as I was exploring Drupal 8, right? That's kind of like the nuts and the bolts. But the beautiful thing about Drupal 8, it's a blessing and a curse, is that it changes every 6 months. There's going to be a new release with new functionality inside of Drupal core. And it's actually beautiful because we will not have a stagnant full version of Drupal for 10 years, right? Every 6 months, we will have new features. And that is great. So what has been on my mind recently? So what are some new things that have been coming up? Well, first, Composer. When Drupal 8 was released, the Composer integration was not as strong as it could have been. It wasn't, there wasn't time to get it completely polished yet. The community didn't feel like it was ready. So the integration was not very great at that point in time. However, with 8.1, the Composer integration became a lot stronger. That Drupal was able to manage different dependencies inside of modules or inside of libraries or themes that rely on Composer. So it's actually really cool. So it really opened the door for a way more potential for Drupal to be outward focused and using best of breed tools that might exist in other ecosystems, in other communities. And it also is really, really great too as a deployment tool. And here's why. For those of you that have considered using Drush Make or have used it in the past as a deployment tool, Composer can replace it. There are tools now using packages and other kind of plugins for Composer that allow any module or any theme that's on Drupal.org to be exposed inside of a composer.json file. As such, when you're deploying or looking at deploying your code, you can run Composer commands. And you could say, I'm using this version of core and these projects and these themes and these libraries. And it's all in one place. Cool, right? There are limitations and challenges with this because conventionally speaking, Drupal 7 was not very rigid or very hard about requirements, right? I could use any module and it could be a dependency, but I wasn't tracking a version. This does. So be very aware that if you are going to use this strategy, this is very new, but it also has the potential to be maybe a little annoying because this is new to the community, and it will make sure that you are using the correct versions of tools. And we haven't had that before, really. So just be aware of it. Caching in BigPipe. So, okay, I don't want to reproduce what Jam already said. It was good enough in his presentation. It was actually very good. So I would just recommend that if you want more information about the massive advancements that have been made in the Drupal caching system, it's huge, it's really high-tech, it's super awesome. I strongly recommend you take a look. Your customers will be thrilled with this approach. And BigPipe is it experimental in 8.1? I think it is. Yeah, and so it's a really awesome technology, but also if you're developing code, you should be aware of what it's doing, right? You should be mindful of how the caching system works, whether it's a cache tag or a cache bin or using the BigPipe strategies. Just be aware of it so you're making good decisions. My favorite, All right, so what are the lessons learned that are going to carry us through the rest of this presentation? First, plan before do. Okay, so, all right, I just want to tell you a very small story. When I was an undergrad in college, I was I hate planning, I hate documentation. This is the worst thing ever. I never want to do this for a living. Oh, it sucks. I just want to code, right? I just want to get my hands dirty, blah, 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 right? But I'm telling you, you have to plan. This is what happens, right? It's a very serious thing, and it's if you take the time and truly understand the problems that you want to solve, you're going to make the right decisions. And the code that you do is going to be stronger, it's going to be better, it's going to be very well received within the community. I just trust me. Definitely plan some things out. Right along the lines of both of the keynotes that we heard is really about community involvement and visibility. I cannot understate how important it is to expose the work that you're doing and talk about it and share it frequently, early, often, and all the time. You definitely have a huge ability, if you're doing code or porting a module, to really show and represent yourself very well to the community. So I would strongly encourage you to do that. And it also is very good for mentoring, as I mentioned earlier, that your mentors will expect you to be working the way that the community works, so that we're all consistent, right? And we can help each other, because inconsistency is much harder to manage if you're trying to do that. So one of the things that I also learned is, and I want to tell you something for those that are newer to the community, the folks that have developed the core of Drupal, like the actual foundation system that we are using, they are brilliant. Like, we are standing on the shoulders of giants. I'm serious. They're geniuses. And they are very hardworking people that have done a tremendous job. And when I have a question about what I'm doing, or I need a reference, what do? I look in core. I immediately look and see, how is core solving this problem? And I guarantee you it is. There's not been one time that it hasn't let me down, right? They make use of the same concepts that you will be using inside of your code. And it works, right? Kind of helpful, right? All right, automated testing. This should not be optional, but we do not have any like forced or rigid standards that every project on Drupal.org has to or must have automated testing. But let me be really clear. If you don't have automated testing, your modules are so hard to maintain. How do you know that if you get a patch that comes in and you need to review it, how do you know that it's not going to break your entire module? Take the time and put in the automated tests. It will be painful, and it will be time consuming. But I promise you, that time pays itself off years and years down the road for long, long periods of time. And writing tests is very challenging. And I have to get into full-out beast mode whenever I write tests, because it is definitely tricky and it's very tedious. But man, you just got to jump in, right, and do it. Cool. So I want to talk a little bit, and this is maybe a bit taboo, and I apologize, because I can't say in one sentence, please work within the community, and then propose solutions that are not sanctioned by the community. But I'm going to. GitHub is, in my view, a much, much easier and faster and more rapid way to develop code. And the pull request system that GitHub has with its repositories and the way that you can share and contribute is perfect. Perfect. For mentorship. You can get feedback directly on a piece of code immediately by your mentor. They don't have to review a patch and download it and pull it in and do this other stuff. They can comment directly in the lines of the code that you made to do it. That, is, my friends, are very, 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 very powerful, right? And it's rapid, it's quick, it's fast. That's what we want, right? Drupal TI is a complementary tool that works within GitHub and Travis CI to run your automated tests that you develop. So as you are doing pull requests, it will give you feedback immediately. Whoa, hold up there, cowboy. Your tests are failing. Go back and fix it. But what I will suggest, because visibility is extremely important, is the minute that you are comfortable, that you have a working version of your module, that you move it to Drupal.org, shut down your GitHub repository, and work exclusively within the community. Because you're out of rapid development mode. And, by the way, you're not losing anything, because the test bot will run on Drupal.org that runs the same exact way that Drupal TI runs in GitHub. So, there you go. You submit patches, and it'll tell you if it works or not. I wish Enzo was here. I didn't see him. But, to be honest with you, there are absolutely tools that can make your life way better when you're doing Drupal 8 development. And the ones that I personally like are PHP Storm, Drupal Console, and Drupal VM. And if you are curious in a container-based solution, we do sponsor one at Civic Actions. It's called Bolin. I would recommend you look at that. It's also very cool and very sexy, if you like that sort of thing. So let's talk a bit about these tools. Well, first, PHP Storm has extensive object-oriented integration. It is purely object-oriented. It works flawlessly. And so you can also build in Drupal's coding standards. So you get immediate feedback on if you have developed something that doesn't have 2 spaces instead of 4 spaces, or what have you. Or you have a curly bracket that is up here and it should be down there. It's going to tell you. It's going to have a little squiggly line and say, oh no, Adam, you kind of didn't do this right. And it's nice to have that inside of your coding tool. PHP Storm also supports Xdebug integration, so it's really easy for you to step through your code and trace it and see what is happening. This is very useful because Drupal 8 is a complex system, so if you want to trace things, it is a very handy tool. Drupal console, and we have Enzo and Kenny as part of these efforts as well, but I know there's such a tremendous strong passion right now for this tool, and it has a lot of growth and a lot of momentum, and it is really, really slick. You can develop a lot of different code for Drupal 8 using Drupal console. So if you do not want to hand code something, because that does take time, right? There are tons and tons of commands that can generate entities and new routes and new services and new controllers and anything you could ever imagine in Drupal 8, and it is constantly evolving. These guys have put their heart and soul into this tool, and it really shows. So, it is super useful if you're doing development. You need to understand what this tool does. It will save you tons of time. I think I got most of password policy written, about maybe 60% just by using console. That is crazy. Oh, I didn't cover Drupal VM, sorry. Drupal VM is also a constantly evolving tool that is very outward focused. Jeff Geerling, he works at Acquia, where I used to work as well, former teammate of mine. He does an incredible job of keeping his project relevant and up to date, and he is super passionate about it. This tool is built on top of Ansible. It's VM based, it uses Vagrant. And it has pretty much every kind of workflow and extensible tool you could probably imagine. It could ship with Solar, or you can use Composer. You can use it has Drush built in and everything, and it's very performant. It usually works right out of the box. It's very nice and convenient. You don't have to spend a lot of time dorking with it. I wrote a blog post about this. If you guys care, it's on my website. And by following these lessons, you all can expect greatness. Thank you so much. I love being here. This has been so much fun. Thank you, and I will take any questions you have.